to our special HMBCC City Council Building Electrification, also known as Reach Chord Ordinance Study Session. And before we begin, I'm going to ask Victor Hernandez to please explain our Spanish interpretation services for those who would like to listen to the session in Spanish. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Muy buenas tardes. Le queremos dejar saber a todos ustedes que esta reunión será interpretada al español. Para poder acceder al canal de audio, usted tendrá que hacer clic en el botón de interpretación, que será un icono de un globo o un icono de un mundo en su barra de tareas de la plataforma Zoom al fondo de su pantalla. Después aparecerá un menú y entonces usted podrá seleccionar el idioma. Gracias. Thank you.
For those who are joining us for the first time or have attended any either council meetings or a special study session, here's the process and the how we'll be handling the meeting. The first thing we'll be doing in this order, this is the order of the meeting. First, we'll receive a staff report about the ordinance. Then we will open it up to council members for clarifying questions only. Then we'll open it up for public comment. And then we will have deliberations by council. So that's the order. And I think we're ready to begin with a staff report.
Mayor Brownstone, if I could call the roll.
Yes, thank you.
Councilmember Jimenez.
Here.
Councilmember Penrose.
Here.
Councilmember Rohrbach.
Here.
Vice Mayor Reddick.
Here.
Mayor Brownstone.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you for the reminder, Jessica. Appreciate it. All right. Now we can begin with our staff report. Thank you.
Mayor, council members, and community. John Dowdy, Public Works Director. With me is Veronica Bostonak, and she will be making this presentation. I just want to first commend her and for all the work and hard work and research and everything that's led to this ultimate second community workshop and study session that we've had. I'll let you know I'm stepping out, going to be standing back here and let her take her mask off and do the presentation so you can see her lips move and face and everything with that. So we'll then come back together. We just figured it'd be easier to do this in the same room together, but we didn't really think about the mask piece of this equation. So we'll work our way through. So I think you'll find this informative. I think the community will find this informative. And we're anxiously, looking forward to a dialogue and conversation with both you as a council and the community on this important matter. Thank you. Veronica.
Thanks, John. Share my screen while he's here. Great. So good evening, Mayor, City Council. It's my pleasure to be here tonight to present a follow-up study session for the Building Electrification Ordinance. A little overview of what brought us here today. Last year, staff initiated work on the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, and we held our first study session on this topic with you all on February 2nd earlier this year. Your direction given at that study session led us to draft an ordinance, which was published on Earth Day, April 22nd. And we conducted public outreach June through September of this year. All of that has brought us here today for the follow-up study session, so we can talk a little bit about the draft and about what we've heard from the public and next steps. We anticipate that the ordinance will be introduced in November of this year, and it would have an effective date of January 2022. Giving a little more context on the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. So the Climate Action Adaptation Plan is kind of split in two parts, as you might guess by the name. The first being the climate action piece. That piece is really focused on greenhouse gas reduction and outlines the city's commitments to achieving state greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. I have two of them here. We have SB 32, which calls for the state to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 40% below 1990 levels by 2030, and an executive order from 2018 to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. Both of these goals have been driving this ordinance. And just for context, the adaptation side of the Climate Action Adaptation Plan will outline strategies to adapt to climate change impacts, such as increased sea level rise, coastal erosion, wildfire, flooding, among others. So what is building electrification? Building electrification describes the move away from fuel gas, so natural gas or propane powered appliances, towards highly efficient electric alternatives. This type of ordinance can assist in meeting the city's climate goals, which I outlined on the slide previously, and I'll go over in a little bit more detail on the next slide, but also can provide benefits for both public health and safety as well. Gas appliances have been linked to poor indoor air quality and increased asthma rates, especially in children. And the natural gas pipelines are a fire risk in the event of an earthquake. And we know here in California that an earthquake is a very real risk. So looking at our greenhouse gas emissions, on the left side, I have a pie chart that breaks out where the greenhouse gas emissions and Half Moon Bay come from. You can see that building energy and transportation account for the vast majority of emissions in the city, then followed by solid waste, wastewater, and water. Both natural gas and transportation, of course, utilizing fossil fuels, there'll need to be some level of behavior change and big changes needed in order to bring those numbers down. Half Moon Bay is a little bit unique in the fact that building energy is our highest contributor. Most cities, building energy and transportation are kind of duking it out for first place. But here in Half Moon Bay, we see building energy where most other cities see transportation as their number one. Zooming in a little bit on the building energy piece, the natural gas emissions account for 80% of that 49% that we see here in this pie chart. And commercial natural gas accounts for about 1.5 times that of what we see from the residential buildings here in the city. So with the study session that we conducted in February, Council provided direction that led to the draft published in April of this year. That draft would require all electric new construction for all buildings, both residential and commercial. It would also require that anytime a gas appliance needed to be replaced, it would be replaced with an electric alternative. Leading to January 2045, where all gas lines would be capped or decommissioned. That 2045, you will notice probably lines up pretty well with that carbon neutrality goal. And the last provision focuses on expanding electric vehicle charging and solar requirements, backup batteries. I can go into more detail on that if there's interest from the council during the question period. I do want to point out some specific exemptions that are not included in the ordinance. So small portable propane tanks, such as what you'd see in grills, fire pits, and patio heaters outside, those would still be allowed, as well as gas-powered generators that would be used for emergency circumstances in the event of a power outage. There's also very limited instances where maybe electric appliances could not or would not exist for a technical or physical infeasibility. So those are the main exemptions that we see listed in the ordinance as written. Looking at the greenhouse gas emission reduction potential for this draft, here I have on the left, we have this is just the energy emissions. We have estimated what we would see in 2030 as if this ordinance was not adopted. And then you can see on the right-hand side, there's about a 16% reduction in 2030 if we do adopt this ordinance in 2022. That reduction will continue to go down. Those greenhouse gases will continue to decrease until 2045, where they would be effectively zero once all natural gas lines would be capped or decommissioned. I do want to note that both our inventory and these projections do not account for methane leakage. Any natural gas pipeline or plumbing has some level of methane leakage, with natural gas being comprised mostly of methane. So if methane leakage were to be considered in this inventory, these numbers would be higher. And the only way to really account for decreasing methane leakage is to cap or decommission lines. So part of the city council feedback that we received in February was not only to draft the ordinance, but also to reach out to the community and the businesses to get an idea of how this may impact their day-to-day lives. So I wanted to, the next series of slides, I wanted to go over what we heard. But here on this slide, I have a sampling of what staff did in June through September in order to reach as many people as possible with as many different methods as possible. So this is a list of summarizing the community feedback that we received this summer. Most constituents were supportive of the provisions for new construction and expanded EV charging and solar panel battery system provisions. So the next slides I have are focused on the rest of the list, which is focused more so on retrofits of existing buildings. I want to note here that staff is not aware of any city within the state that has adopted an ordinance that focuses on retrofits of existing buildings. So that's why we wanted to dig a little bit deeper into each of these points below. So first, we've heard from the community that in light of power outages and rotating blackouts and PSPS events, that residents and businesses are concerned about the grid's ability to handle the added load associated with building electrification. Staff has had conversations with both PCE and PGE, and the load increase is not expected to be significant. In Half Moon Bay, it's almost negligible, and if the state were to adopt full building electrification, it would account for about 1% or 2% if you consider electric vehicle charging. We use a lot of electricity here in the state, so our building energy doesn't account for very much in comparison. Staff has had, like I said, many conversations with both PCE and PG&E. Both are planning for building electrification. While no other jurisdiction has adopted an ordinance focused on existing buildings, a lot of other places are looking at it. And it's expected that more and more cities are going to adopt as we get closer to 2030 and 2045. Both entities are eager to partner with the city to make sure that electrification can be well planned and have the least amount of impact on their customers. Because of these conversations that staff has had with PCE and PG&E, we don't have any policy changes recommended in regards to power reliability. And gas powered generators are still allowed in the event of an emergency power outage. There's also been concern that the ordinance may encourage more unsafe, unpermitted work for those who may be looking to not comply with the ordinance if they want to keep their gas appliances. And there's also concerns that the ordinance may not be effective, with permits being the main way to account for these changes. Staff shares this concern. Permits are currently only required for replacements of water heaters and HVAC. So that leaves a couple appliances that do not require permits for replacement. And about 10% of current residential replacements have obtained the required permits. So that number is fairly low, but is not unusual. It's a fairly industry standard. Most cities have about 10 to 12% compliance for these types of replacements. So while this is low, it's not unique to Half Moon Bay. And I do want to mention that commercial compliance is estimated to be at about 80%. So this is a concern more so for the residential buildings than the commercial buildings. In order to address this concern, there's a tiered approach with varying levels of effort involved. The first, of course, being the need to increase public and contractor education. We want to make sure that both building owners and the contractors are not surprised when it comes to making these replacements, and they're well aware and can make the necessary preparations to do so. Beyond that, there are options to modify the building code or to require some sort of certification, which would usually happen at the time of sale or change of occupancy of a dwelling unit. We've also received some requests from the commercial sector for a delay for the retrofit requirements for about 5 to 7 years. This is due to the high expense of these appliances, whether they're gas or electric, and some more limited options available for commercial. There are a lot of electric alternatives available for many of the commercial uses that we see today, but it's unclear how easily those would be able to be retrofitted on a short time period. So we heard from the businesses that they want some more time to plan so that they can make the necessary preparations and look a little bit deeper into the available technology. The policy consideration for you all tonight, as you may expect, would be to consider whether you want to delay retrofit requirements for non-residential buildings after 2025. So we have 2 options here. One would be to provide a delay for all commercial buildings. The other would be to provide exemption for everything except for small water heaters and HVAC with air conditioning. The reason behind the small water heaters and the HVAC is these appliances are very similar to what you may see in a residential home. They're pretty available, and they're the most cost effective what we would see in the commercial buildings. So that's why we have these 2 options here for you all. I do want to mention that any delay beyond 2025 would impact the city's ability to meet our 2030 greenhouse gas emission goals. Every year that goes on, it makes it more and more difficult to hit those goals. And I do want to also say that currently there's no punitive measures if the city doesn't make it, but it will become more difficult to reach that 2045 goal. Next, we have received some specific community exemptions that I wanted to outline here. The first, we heard from a lot of residents that they wanted their residential cooking appliances and fireplaces to be exempted. The main reason being that they do not feel as though an electric alternative is equivalent to their gas. This could be due to lack of familiarity or experience with some of the newer technologies, but cooking and fireplaces in a residential building account for a very small amount of greenhouse gas emissions. There's also a request for cooking appliances for the case of commercial kitchens. Many restaurants and other commercial kitchens are concerned about getting familiar with the new technology, understanding how that may affect their menu items or how any staff training that would be needed. So there was a request that all cooking appliances be exempted for commercial kitchens, but there was also some requests for exemptions for those with a specific business need. So here in Half Moon Bay, we heard about some pizza or bakery ovens that require a flame for the texture and the flavor of the product that they serve. And these businesses do not feel as though electric alternatives would yield the same results. Next, we heard from both residents and businesses that they would like to see exemptions for commercial greenhouses. These greenhouses use big boilers similar to what you might see in a hotel to heat their greenhouses. And both the residents and the businesses are concerned that this added cost for any retrofit and potential for increased energy bills would affect these businesses because they already have such a small profit margin. I also want to note that these greenhouses don't have the opportunity to put solar on their roofs. They need the sun to shine into their greenhouses. So the ability for them to install solar to offset any energy costs would likely not be viable. We've also received requests both from residents and businesses that they would like to see expanded exemptions for exceptional circumstances. You may recall on the slide where I went over the summary, it's very limited right now just to technical or physical infeasibilities. And much of the community would like to see these exemptions broadened a little bit to allow for more different types of circumstances. And the last concern that I will be talking about today, which is the biggest concern that we heard from both businesses and residences, was the cost of implementation. There will be an added expense for all gas users, whether they be businesses, homeowners, or renters. There's really no sugarcoating that. There's also costs associated with doing nothing with climate change or with the potential for natural gas costs to increase over time. And I do want to mention that some of these added expenses may be recovered over time, especially with some of the rebates and programs that are available. A lot of these new appliances are really efficient and will result in bill savings over time. Staff was able to prepare a cost estimate for residential homes. We were not able to do so with commercial, since commercial has such specialty equipment and each situation is very different. So we were unable to create a cost estimate for commercial buildings, but we do have one for residential that was included in the staff report, and I have some of the data points on the next slide. But I do want to caveat this with costs will vary significantly depending on circumstance. As I'm sure any of you who have worked on a construction project will know, there's very specific circumstances with buildings that can make it easier or harder to electrify, and that's going to be specific to each individual home. Staff has estimated that without a panel upgrade, it will cost homeowners about $7,000 to $20,000, assuming they had to replace their stove, their furnace, their water heater, and their dryer. That cost estimate does not include any of the incentives, rebates, or tax credits that are available now. I have some samplings of what is available, and we expect that more of these types of programs will be available as more and more cities move towards existing building electrification. And there's also some low and no cost financing opportunities that can make it easier for homeowners and building owners to make these changes. So here's a line item of each of those 4 big appliances that I mentioned, and we have a couple more items included in the staff report. These costs would assume the cost of the appliance and any pre-wiring that would be required, but again, costs will vary depending on situation. And we have an upgrade and costs associated with an upgrade to an electric panel. Some homes, especially those that are under 100 amps, will likely need to upgrade an electric panel, and homes that have between 100 and 200 amp panel may need some extra planning or may need an upgrade. So we can answer any questions about this if they come up, but I wanted to show you this chart here. Here is an example of some of the rebates that are available. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. There's more than this available. All of these are currently available to San Mateo County residents and Half Moon Bay residents. A lot of these can be stacked. So if you see for the heat pump water heater, there's one from Bayren, PCE, and PG&E, and these can be stacked to $2,300. And there's extra funding available for those who are low income or who may need a panel upgrade. So again, this is just an example of some of the rebates that are available today. I also wanted to give a little bit more information about some of the low and no cost financing options that are available. There's some that are available today, both for residents and commercial buildings. And I do want to give a special shout out to the PCE program, which was recently approved for development by the board late in August. We expect this program to be available to residents and PCE customers in January of next year. And this would provide a $10,000 loan for 10 years at 0% interest with very little underwriting. So as long as you're a customer that's in good standing for, I believe, 3 months, you will be able to qualify for this loan. So that brings us to the request for you all tonight. First is to conduct this community workshop on the draft building electrification ordinance. And second, to provide staff policy direction to prepare the building electrification ordinance for formal introduction in November of this year. I know I went over a lot of information here, so before I just want to show you, I have some slides that show a summary of what I talked about in the policy and exemption considerations for you all. I have one for residential and for commercial. So I'm very happy to bring that up when it comes time for deliberation, so you can use it as a reference. So with that, I will leave it for questions.
Councilmember Penrose. These are clarifying questions and then we'll get to the public. Thanks.
Yes, Veronica, wonderful presentation. Thank you. It took me a while to read through it prior to coming tonight, and I found it very thorough and comprehensive and thoughtfully put together. I do, however, not understand sort of the basics of how we got to our figures for the building and transportation contribution to greenhouse gas. The, what was it, 57 and 49%, whatever that is. And what do we mean by building and what do we mean by transportation?
Sure. So we have a greenhouse gas inventory that we've prepared for the CAP. I believe that I shared a summary of it probably back in February, but as Half Moon Bay is a part of a county program called RICAPS, which is a Regional Integrated Climate Planning Suite. They have staff that compile the data for the greenhouse gas inventory and supply them to all of the cities. So we're using the same methodology that many of the other cities within the county use. The building energy is calculated using the PCE energy use data, so both the natural gas and the electric, and then we also have some data for self-generators. So that data comes directly from PCE or PG&E, and then the transportation is estimated for vehicle miles traveled. So this is looking at trips that happen within the city, both starting and ending, and some passing through. I don't have a thorough I don't have a thorough explanation as to how the transportation emissions are calculated and how those are done, but I'm happy to get that information to you if that's of interest.
Yeah, what my concern is when I look at building, we don't have a lot of big buildings in Half Moon Bay. We have mostly single family residences. And some small commercial buildings. And we have an enormous number of vehicles entering our city and leaving our city on weekends and traveling around our city on weekends. So the numbers seem strange to me, and I would love to see it. We don't have to do it right now.
Well, Councilmember, let me jump into that one. So
yeah.
The issue of transportation is the transportation use and basically within the city limits, and it does not include our transient trips to and from. Those trips and those costs and those greenhouse gas emissions are allocated to basically where those began. So if we have folks coming from Hayward, for example, to the beach, those are accounted for basically as a Hayward, in essence, resident because they started there. So this is so we don't double and triple count all of our trips. So basically our allocation and our emissions inventory is based on basically what we generate as residents here of Half Moon Bay in and around and start from trips and everything like that. So that's the difference, and that's why it looks odd, and that's why the model of VMT and vehicle miles traveled is a difficult one, frankly, for us, because it really doesn't match up with a community that receives a lot of transient visits and transient trips. but that's the way the whole model is set up. So we don't double and triple count things. And this was something I was dealing with at another agency where we had Highway 101 running through our entire county, and actually 2 counties. And the question being, who gets those trips that are started in Los Angeles or San Diego that go through us? So this is why it was all kind of determined. It was based on sort of the point of beginning of those trips rather than take the chance that we're counting, 3, 4, 5 times the same trips. So it's a tough one, but that's how that's accounted for.
I appreciate that. And I guess my only comment on that would be then, why do we even look at these numbers? They don't tell me whether I should be concentrating more on putting electric charging stations in or getting somebody to convert from a gas to an electric heater. I don't know what use they are.
If I could clarify that, I don't think it's an or. That's really what this inventory tells us, is that if it is our goal to try to reach the 2030 and 2045 targets that were set by the state, we don't have an or situation. We have to look at both categories to address this, because we can't do one or the other. Obviously, 2045 heads us toward the idea that we would be at 2035 based on the governor's proposal at this point, is to have all electrification basically of our fleet, which would significantly obviously reduce the transportation side, but transportation alone does not get us to the 2045 target, for example. So it's not an either or, it's an and situation that we find ourselves in, frankly.
Okay.
I don't know if
And was that any more on that question, or?
No, thank you.
Councilmember Pembroke, okay, wants to make sure you. Councilmember Rohraback, I believe, had his hand up next.
Thank you, Veronica. You mentioned that one of the questions we have to answer is to delay retrofitting for commercial buildings. I just want to clarify, if an existing commercial building has a gas appliance and it doesn't need to be replaced, the ordinance would not require them to actually do the retrofit until the appliance burns out. Is that right?
Correct.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Councilmember Wright.
So could you go into a little bit more detail about emissions relative to, commercial versus residential? And if commercial is more, why is that so? I'm trying to understand the various sectors and their contribution.
So ultimately, it comes down to how commercial buildings, to what scale and how commercial buildings use natural gas. So if you think about cooking, for instance, if there's a stove in a home, you're using the stove to make your meals, maybe up to 3 times a day. Where on the commercial side, a restaurant or a hotel is going to be using those cooking appliances for the entire day. So the scale of which the commercial buildings are using natural gas is so much bigger than what you would see in a residential building, and that's true with water heating, space heating, et cetera.
I would say this as well. We haven't confirmed the number, but we were told that Rocket Farms has under roof roughly 1 million square feet of greenhouse area. Those are glass, those are being heated by natural gas. So that is, when you look at, frankly, I was surprised that the commercial wasn't higher as a disproportionately to residential in some regards. When you think of just 1 million square feet of greenhouse area being heated by natural gas. So that's also part of the scaling that you've got. And obviously, I'll say it because You know, when you look at a hotel like the Ritz-Carlton or any other hotel, but the Ritz-Carlton is a large facility, obviously, major commercial grade natural gas boilers. They heat the entire building off of a large boiler and a large, four boilers and natural gas served. So, you know, that's just a tremendously different over even a series of houses and single family homes or apartments that use their furnaces and such.
So as for greenhouses, I mean, you don't necessarily have to have solar fixtures on the roof, right? I mean, you could have a separate area that's kind of like a solar microgrid to which your greenhouses, you know, are attached, right? And the source, power source doesn't have to be on the roof. Is that right?
Yes, but of the businesses that I spoke to, some of them had looked into solar to see if it was an option to reduce their electricity costs. And they were not able, the generation potential was not able to cover the amount of energy that they use.
We're also talking about, so I will say this, my understanding is that Rocket Farms had reached out to the city in some form to start to talk about maybe even cogeneration. So trying to reduce their footprint on natural gas and look at cogeneration opportunities. And we're excited by the potential of that in the interim period, whatever that may be. Beyond that, this does come down to the point of just technology. Obviously, when you have a commercial boilers and you're dealing with it, the easiest answer really is to have the flame burning, heating, you know, around there, as opposed to electric, where you have to have heating coils, and those just are not as readily available, and the technology hasn't necessarily evolved fully that we're aware of to look at those commercial boiler situations and fully implement. That's our concern, is that whether the technology in fact has caught up to that point in that kind of scenario.
My response to that would be, you know, the horticultural industry, much like the cannabis grow industry, probably needs to look at technological innovations to reduce water use and electric use. So the practices have to change too. So it's not a matter of technology supporting increasingly unsustainable practices. The practices have to change too. And I understand that Rocket Farms has some program of agricultural innovation. I think they should look at that. You know, the industry as a whole should look at that. Thanks for letting me be on my pedestal. I'd like to hear from the public. I just want to thank Veronica for, you know, a great job. I was really impressed with the amount of outreach. You know, I'd like to see us, you know, follow that path on other, you know, mega issues, and we're dealing with a lot of mega issues right now. So thank you for a job well done.
Thank you. Councilmember Jimenez.
Veronica, great presentation. You know, thank you. I have several questions. Has anybody in Half Moon Bay retrofitted their home? And if they have, what was the cost of it? Do we have any record of that?
We have a couple of residents that have retrofitted their homes, and those considerations were included in the cost estimate. I've spoken to about 2 or 3 homeowners that have electrified their homes.
So the cost to retrofit the home goes up to $27,000. Is that what you got the estimate from?
That's what our estimate. I don't have the numbers of those specific homes right readily available to me, but the cost estimate took into account both the homes that have retrofitted in Half Moon Bay and looking at cost estimates from local contractors and working with community development and public works to refine those numbers a little bit. I will say there have been some other entities that have done cost studies. There's some that are higher and there's some that are lower. Ours kind of runs right in the middle.
Thank you.
Mhm.
One more question. Any cities, in the Bay Area have passed any ordinance like this? Have anybody else done it?
So there's a lot of cities in the county and in the area that have adopted ordinances for new construction. There's a couple that have added provisions for electrification provisions for large remodels or pre-wiring, but there's no other city in the area or in the state that we're aware of that has looked at retrofitting existing appliances in homes or businesses.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mhm.
Councilmember Jimenez. I had a question from the staff report. And it was in it came up a couple of times about if we consider delaying any applications for residential requirements to delay, in terms of delaying application of electrification requirements to existing residential buildings. It says with the exception of water heaters, 120 gallons or less. Now, in my research on water heaters, gone on Google and said, hey, what's the average size of a water heater for a one-family home?
Yeah, so
let me
sorry.
just
Sorry.
finish. So what I came up with, is either 40 gallons for 1 to 4 people, 50 gallons for 4 to 6 people. I know that not all gas water heaters are created equal. Some are more expensive than others, and some are, more efficient in terms of how quickly they heat the water up again. So, how many showers you can get, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought, now it's one thing to have a commercial building, apartments, yeah, they would probably have a much larger capacity water heater. But I wanted to point out that for most single family homes, we're more than likely talking about a 40 or 50 gallon capacity tank. And I think if we're going to consider any exceptions, I would lower that 120 gallon or specify if it's for multi-units versus single family homes, something like that, and differentiate those two. I don't want to get into a whole discussion now. But anyway, the only number I ever saw that was the 120, and I just don't think it was descriptive of all the choices that we might have moving forward.
If I could,
yeah.
So 120 was the outside number, obviously, and frankly, our building inspector and I have seen houses put 120 gallon water heaters in. They're not as unusual as they may find on the Google search with it, and they range, and many are 60 to 80 gallons, frankly. But rather than debate it, that was just a number we landed on as the high end. What we were really trying to distinguish was if you have a commercial enterprise that uses basically a boiler system, we were trying to say maybe we shouldn't require those at that point to have to retrofit that initially at that point, that we give them a 5-year lead in to if they have failure to replace that again because of technical reasons and everything else out there. The 120, you could change it, whatever you wish to do. But it was our recommendation that 120 was the outer end of the smaller water heaters that basically constituted something that you would find in both a commercial, setting as well as a residential setting. And I agree with you, 40 to 60 gallons is probably the norm out there, but it's, and what I have seen also houses that have 2 or 3 water heaters, so they may have 40 gallons, they have 3 of them because they serve different different bathrooms in their home and everything. So those are the ways sort of things are handled and zoned sometimes with regard to water heaters. But that was really a distinguishment between the large enterprises and the boiler kind of deal, and say an office building that individually each suite had its own water heater. And we said, this is a pretty low hanging fruit in order to get them to change out when it burns out, to change out those rather than allow those, say, to continue to be replaced over the next 5 years as a theoretical waiver time at this point.
Got it. Thank you. And I also, I wanted to clarify just for council, but also for members of the public who might be looking at their water heater in the house and say, wow, wait a minute, what are they talking about there? So good, that helps. And any other clarifying questions from council before we move on to public questions? Okay, so now for members of the public, we'll have 2 minutes each to for their comments, and that timer you'll see up on our screen. And why don't we just wait a minute for people to give a chance to raise their hands. And if you're unfamiliar with the process here, if you go into the attendees list under participants, you can find your name and you'll see where you can raise your hand to get in the queue for making comments. So again, if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Look for your name in the attendees list under participants. And see the symbol for raised hand. You can see other folks are already getting in the queue here. And then each speaker will have 2 minutes to speak.
Thanks. Our first speaker is Judy Taylor. Judy, you have 2 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. We all recognize that this is inevitable. It's just a question of how it's going to happen. Your numbers that were just put up on the board said that a heat pump is going to be like 10 grand. And I had a client do one 2 years ago, small house in Moss Beach. It was 15. The rebates are only $1,000. When you've got a furnace that blows, you don't just pull out the furnace and plug in a new one. There are all kinds of associated costs that have to go with that. In previous meetings, it's been raised about what happens with the HOAs and the condos. And staff said, well, they can't prohibit them anymore. But y'all need to reach out to the HOAs. What do you do when you've got one roof and 6 units under that one roof? What are you going to do with tenants when their landlord switches out and doesn't put in solar, and all of a sudden their PG&E bills go up by 60 and 70%? There's just so much here. It's a big deal. This is really a big deal. And you guys, you need to dig deeper. There needs to be outreach, not just waiting for people to come to you. You need to go out to the HOAs. You need to go out to the tenants and find out what the implications of this are going to be. And in addition to that, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we're not paying attention to. Why do we still allow garbage disposals? Passive solar, our biggest thing on the coast is getting warmth and light into our homes. And you drive around town and count the number of homes that have been built in the last 30 years that have the garage on the south or the west side of the building. That is just insane. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Next speaker.
Thanks, Judy. Next is Bruce Nagel. Bruce, you have 2 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to thank the staff team, Veronica, et cetera, put together that report. They did a lot of hard work to do it. They recognize some of the issues that we still need to work through, but they're putting a lot of it on the table, showing the balances of things. And I like particularly the fact that they're looking at 2030 versus 2045 goals. That's not something I've seen in other plans, and I get to see a fair number of them because I'm a member of a number of different organizations. So, the comments there are important. There's one thing I asked for previously that I think is important, and that is something called ALMS, which is Automatic Load Balancing System or Load Management System. And it is a facility that will make your electric car charging more efficient. And, you know, I think that at least have some mention of this, even if you can't explore it a lot to begin with, would be important to put into the plan. Because we are going to need to have places to charge all these electric cars if we're indeed going to move to being all electric in terms of our cars. So again, thank you for the work. I understand there's still some work to be done. There was a fair amount of outreach that was done. You know, it was fairly extensive. Maybe more has to be done to understand it, but I think there's a lot there, and I commend the work that's been done to put this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
Next, we have Barbara LeVay. Barbara, you have 2 minutes.
Hey, good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Barbara LeVay, and I really want to thank all of you for the spirit in which, you know, you're coming from. I agree wholeheartedly that we do have to change our ways of living and adjust, but this is going to be pretty catastrophic for some families. And what I would like to propose, really, hopefully before we make this a real ordinance, we'd like to see the city provide education to the Half Moon Bay homeowners in the form of a workshop. I think I've brought this kind of idea up before in other instances. And to have like a vendor exposition prior to the passage of this ordinance, Half Moon Bay homeowners should be able to understand their options, meet with some vendors, learn about some technologies, explore solar choices that may be available, and discuss financing options with professionals who can show them and discuss financing options, and also talk to professionals who can show them appliances, demonstrate their performance, lay out funding options available to them, and answer their questions. Only after learning more about the conversion to electric only can homeowners fully express their views to the city. So it is a big deal. I really appreciate all the work that went into it. Veronica, thank you. It's not easy. There's so much to it, and I'd like to be a part of the solution and not throw up a bunch of red flags. So let's go green. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Next speaker is Linda. Linda, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Judy Taylor already touched on one of the topics I was going to bring up. I had a couple, and I noticed in your slides, one of the main ones I had was how we are going to work with the community, because there's a lot of people out there that cannot afford to do these changes. I know the numbers that you came up with, but in SAMCAR, we came up with much bigger numbers that probably doubled or tripled your numbers. Now, also, I live at Amesport, and I live upstairs in a little one unit. How are we going to make that happen? I talked to the president of our HOA, who is continuing to be the president of our HOA because nobody else wants to do it. And she kind of had a deer in the headlights look when I asked her about solar panels and what we would do about Amesport. And she had mentioned something about they looked at the carports and they weren't sturdy enough and this and that. Well, I mean, in my mind, they've got to fix that and they've got to deal with it. But we also need the city to come out to these people, because they are not going to come out to you. They're more concerned with wind chimes and is the grass green enough and that sort of thing. They're not paying attention to these huge issues. So my other question to you is, why do we have to be first? Why don't we just look at what other cities have done and see, you know, how that works for them and learn from their mistakes rather than the other way around? So that's really all I have to say, but thank you so very much.
Thank you very much for your comments, Linda. Appreciate it.
And next is Martha Longy. Martha, you have 2 minutes. Martha, if you could unmute yourself.
Hi, so sorry. Hi, my name is Martha Longy. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I work in the city of Half Moon Bay and I live in the neighboring community of Mahonda. My home is not up in the hills or on a remote location. It's right on Highway 84 in a very, accessible thoroughfare. And I just wanted to alert you to several random power outages that have been occurring in our area over the last several weeks. Power outages that are going on for more than 24 hours. The last one we had was this Saturday. It went out at about 10:15 in the morning and didn't come back until Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock. The previous Saturday, the day of the big 49er game, it went out at 10:30 in the morning, didn't come back until almost 8 o'clock that night. And again in August. The way that PG&E is trying to figure out why these things are happening is they're flying these helicopters very, very low to the ground. We had an event at my home when the power went out this Saturday, and when the helicopters came to try to figure out what was going on, they were so close that I could see the face of the pilot from my deck. It was very scary, and at one point it looked like they could even crash into the trees in the area. So I just want to make sure and ask you folks as to the decision makers to please give lots of consideration to this and to talk with PG&E more about how they're going to handle the increase. Perhaps from the numbers that you gave today, the increase is slight for Half Moon Bay, but if the whole state of California converts to this, it's going to be a significant increase, and our infrastructure right now is not able to handle it. So just wanted to put that out there. I hope that we can partner with other cities like Menlo Park that's looking into this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha.
Next speaker is Sarah Bueno. Oops. Sarah, I would have to promote you to panelist, so please make sure that your video is turned off. Okay. Okay, Sarah, you have 2 minutes.
Hi, Mayor and council members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. So in Half Moon Bay, there's a large amount of older homes, and requiring those homes to replace their wiring and electrical panels alone, the cost associated to that can be between $20,000 to $60,000, and that's not including any of the other steps that are needed to have those replaced to electrical. You also mentioned about the appliances. When one appliance, fails and you have to replace it, that replacement needs to meet the electrical requirement. There's a lot more that goes into that than simply just plugging in a new appliance. There's ampage that you have to consider, there's wiring, there's panels, and I just want to make sure that all of that is being accounted for, because I feel that some of the costs associated aren't relevant to what it actually is going to be. Particularly myself, I just did a remodel and we're about 85% electric now, and that was well over 40,000 of our budget went into that process, which included permitting, contractors, etc. So I just wanted to bring that up as something that's taken into consideration. And in regards to the rebates listed, those don't come close to what it's going to actually cost residents to comply with these new restrictions. So just wanted to bring light to that as well. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Sarah. Our next speaker is Maureen Fleming. Maureen, you have 2 minutes.
Good evening, council members and community. The electrification of Half Moon Bay is another intrusion of big government mandating the comfort level of its citizens and what can be done or installed in their humble castles. I urge that the City Council refrain from this power grab and intrusion into one's home. I urge that the City Council refrain from its overzealous approach to climate change. There is nothing that is said at these electrification meetings that I believe. If you were interested in stating the truth to the community, you would have a few vigorous debates between the natural gas industry and the electrical industry. Then I ask, are you numb to the community about their input that you have received? Because you have attached to this agenda packet pages of people who support natural gas. Also, you are sitting ordinary citizens who are law-abiding on a path to becoming criminals. You are writing in your ordinance about fines and penalties, and the only thing that's missing is that they will be prosecuted to the full force of the law. As a side note, homeowners now and currently have a hard time finding skilled labor on this side of the coast. You will find that the San Mateo County Board of Realtors estimates the cost at $100,000 to $300,000 for a conversion. It is a false narrative for non-homeowners to say this ordinance will not affect them, because an investor who has real estate, rental real estate, will pass on these very high conversion charges in the form of rent increases. You will also have to enlarge the size of your planning and building department to hire more inspectors, and you will have to increase property taxes. I just urge that you stick with that you forego changing existing residential and maybe have some new ordinances for new construction. My final comments are that when we have power outages, which are frequently,
Martha, if you could wrap it up because our time is up.
I will wrap it up. I really, for me, not to get a hot cup of coffee because I don't have gas is absolute torture. Finally, we're in the pandemic and you can't get any supplies. So people come January who are looking for appliances is like, good luck to them. And a very important note, and then I will conclude.
Martha, your time is up.
Our next speaker is Frank Bento. Frank, you have 2 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Not a resident of Half Moon Bay, but I work in Half Moon Bay. And as Martha Longy pointed out, the past 2 weekends we've been out of power with helicopters buzzing over our heads. And thinking not just of the condos, but facilities like Moon Ridge, our Half Moon Bay senior housing. I just don't see any viable reason for converting properties from a mix of gas and electric over to full-on electric. And where's the fine line of, if something breaks on the appliance, I can't have it fixed, or it's at complete end of its service life when there's no more service parts available. What's the fine line there? But overall, myself, I love to cook with gas heat, and converting to electric would not be an option. And most of the I'm not positive because I haven't been in all the kitchens, but I would guesstimate that more than 90% of the restaurants in Half Moon Bay all cook on gas. And I just don't see this as a good move for the city and the costs of the retrofits to the homeowners. We have a senior housing park at the end of town, and most all those people are on fixed incomes, and it's going to throw some of those people over the edge to do these conversions. So thank you for listening to the public and taking our comments.
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate it.
The next speaker is Ed Holmquist. Ed, you have 2 minutes.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. I'm not a resident of Half Moon Bay. I'm an energy consultant working with Rocket Farms. And I appreciate the comments that were made earlier about Rocket Farms. 1 million square feet, certainly a big undertaking would be to try and electrify that facility. First of all, you can't do solar there. Obviously, a greenhouse is a greenhouse, and you need the sun. So you can't do solar, rooftop solar there. And the cost of making the conversion from natural gas would be very, very steep for those guys. And public safety plan shutdowns are real. We've heard it from lots of folks here this evening. And that, you see how it impacts residents on a smaller scale. Imagine 1 million square feet, and they're relying on utility power that's going to go out. And if you have to take all of their utilities, including taking away their natural gas, now if they don't have heat for their plants and their nursery, they could have substantial issues from a revenue generation perspective. So not only would they be losing money, but they would, by losing potential flowers or seed starts, whatever it might be, but the cost of retrofitting it would be crazy. So this is a mission critical facility in their eyes, just like everyone has their business. And I strongly suggest looking at other alternative energy solutions. Someone mentioned cogeneration earlier, which is certainly a good option, but not take, the key there is to not take their natural gas away from them. It will drive another nail into their coffin. That's all I have to say. Try and be brief. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ed.
And next we have Gina Zari. Gina, go ahead.
Good evening, Council, Mayor, and Council members. Thank you for taking the time to listen to us. I wanted to touch briefly on a study that we did. We conducted a study on cost, and the reason being appliances are one thing, probably about $14,500 to $36,000 in appliances, but that's not the biggest cost. The biggest cost associated with this, and it's not for every home, some are electric only already. Some homes only require certain things, some require undergrounding, some require new paneling, new wiring, which triggers asbestos. Some require different items, that swimming pools perhaps. So we did a study and we created, and you should have it in your packet. I gave it to Veronica, who's been fantastic to work with. We did a study that demonstrates all of the costs. We talked to 8 electrical contractors in San Mateo County, and they gave us estimates on all of the possible associated costs. So when you're hearing these numbers of hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's if a home needs every single item to be completed in order to work, in order to adjust to the new law. The costs are extremely high. Structural costs can go anywhere from $40,000 to $90,000, and that's just structural. So in addition to that, you have other items like if they want solar panels, or if they require a new roof because of the solar panels, if they want a backup battery, if they have a swimming pool, that's going to cost a great deal of money. In addition, there's an item we didn't put on the list that I think we're going to include and amend the study, which is generators. A lot of people, particularly those with health requirements, will want generators, and that's something to consider. But I think it's really important that we look at the real costs, because if you don't look at the real costs, you can't have the financing available for these homeowners. And some people are going to require, $134,000 like we showed in our study, and on the high end, $293,000. That's if someone needs everything done to their home. So please take into consideration that the costs are pretty high, and we really want to make sure that there's financing options available to homeowners. Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Wonderful.
I'm unmuted. Thank you. Appreciated the report. It would have been even better if we had been able to see it in advance of the meeting like y'all did. Let's start with section 1, findings, in the first paragraph. Staff has not demonstrated specific impact on local climatic conditions within City of Half Moon Bay. Paragraph 5, they find unprecedented sea level rise in the area. According to NOAA, sea level rise at San Francisco has been 1.8 millimeters per year for at least 170 years. There's nothing new or unprecedented here. Staff had no response to this data which refutes their claim. Similarly, staff has provided no specific detailed analysis demonstrating the claimed more severe routes. The city of Half Moon Bay has not met the threshold to establish new restrictive amendments under Health Code 18941. Sorry, if I had known what was going to be presented, I would have been better prepared to reply. There was no comment, no realistic evaluation of operating expense for electric versus gas. On my PG&E bill, 1 therm of gas costs 1/4 as much as the electric power, the same amount of electric power. So usually the comparisons are made between old style electric and new style electric, but that's not what we're doing here. So that's not fair. I want to pick up on what a council member Jimenez brought up, but the ordinance specifically mentions lead the climate change movement. If City of Half Moon Bay leadership truly believes this mantra, they should lead by example and immediately voluntarily implement this ordinance in their own homes and businesses. And after that, they'll be able to see if it's fair or not, or makes sense, or what it costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Robert Whitehair.
Mayor Brownstone, members of the council, my name is Robert Whitehair. I'm a 40-year resident of San Mateo County, and I'm also vice chair of the nonprofit organization Sustainable San Mateo County. I want to thank you for the opportunity to address the council and on your very bold consideration of eliminating fuel gas that is methane from PG&E and propane. I congratulate Half Moon Bay on a very well thought out ordinance. Many of us in the county have been watching closely over the past year as this all unfolds. Council and staff is to be especially congratulated for its vigorous outreach to the community. Well done. My wife and I live in a 70-year-old home built with natural gas appliances, little insulation, and single pane windows. We are diligently replacing all our gas appliances. We have been cooking on electricity for the last 2 years. We took advantage of PCE grants and replaced a heat pump water heater. And we're about to receive a proposal for a heat pump for heating and cooling. I want you to know my wife and I are not well-to-do, and it's painful to find the money, but necessary. I also want you to know that the prices we have seen line up very closely to what is in the staff report. The stove, the heat pump water heater, and the proposal for heating and cooling are all within the boundaries of what the staff has in the report. And I also want to mention that we've gotten all of this with building permits. I want to leave you with the total price is not even close to $100,000, let alone $300,000. And we had to do no structural upgrades on a 70-year-old house. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And I wish that you were able to adopt the ordinance as presented. It's time to take strict and strong climate action. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Next speaker is Nick Bavaro.
Sorry about that. I had to unmute. Good afternoon. Thank you for the time. I appreciate you guys listening. Obviously, I'm the president of Rocket Farms, and we have a valued interest in the ordinance that is being proposed. I understand there is an exemption for nurseries within the city limits, and I would appreciate the follow through with that, because without natural gas, we cease to exist. We cannot run off electricity. At the increases of electricity, the retrofit alone, we're talking about $8 million at least. At the very least, that's at today's costing. The increase in PG&E electrical, I can't run the nursery on electricity. It's an impossibility. Without my boilers, we are literally out of business. So from our perspective, this is a non-negotiating point, and we really do appreciate the fact that the city is considering implementing an exemption for nurseries within the city limits. Nurseries will cease to exist without propane. I don't know what else to say. This is a very serious consideration that you're putting in place. As far as homeowners, I really can't speak to it because I do not live within the city limits of Half Moon Bay. And so I can't really speak to that. I do know that it feels very much like an infringement of our rights, but that's, here nor there. I think as a business owner and the largest employer within the city limits of Half Moon Bay, it would be detrimental to our business and literally probably the last nail in the coffin. That's really all I have to say. I think if this was to continue further, that we would take a different position. But I do appreciate the fact that you are considering an exemption for nurseries within the city limits.
Our next speaker is Adrian.
Hi, thank you.
Go ahead. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Adrian Etherton, Half Moon Bay resident, and just want to commend the staff for their bold proposal and the extensive community outreach. I'd like to encourage the council to consider moving forward with the current proposal mostly intact to address some of the concerns that have been raised related to low-income residents and small businesses and nurseries. I would encourage considering phasing in the requirements for existing buildings for specific users, use cases, or costs over an established threshold. Veronica suggested a delay for non-residential buildings to 2025 with perhaps requirements for small water heating and HVAC remaining intact. And I think that seems very reasonable and also provides a few years during which building owners could plan and prepare. In the meantime, we can coordinate with PCE and others to create programs that help those least able to afford the requirements to make the change and do lots of education and outreach. A lot of concerns have been raised related to the current markets, limited equipment choices for some uses, technology not being available, few contractors trained to do the installations, and high costs. But the market has already come a long way in a short time and will continue to develop. There is no better way to encourage this market development than to send a strong signal, and that is exactly what this policy will do. The writing is on the wall. We know we have to address emissions. The experts agree we must zero them out by mid-century. Let's not pretend that we can get there without making these changes. Starting early will help minimize investments that we as a city and as individual property owners make in equipment that makes the problem worse. Change is costly, but so is inaction. Please consider moving forward with this proposal, and thank you for your time and consideration.
Very good. Next speaker, please.
Timothy Pond, you have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Tim Pond and I live in Half Moon Bay and I've lived around here for 30 years. I think immediately you should prohibit gas in all new structures, and major remodels over 50% should be made to get rid of gas entirely. Being beholden to the gas and oil industry is not freedom or cheap. They have the right and they will raise the price on the gas whenever there is a shortage or high demand. And electricity is much more easily controlled because with solar panels and local production, which we can my house is completely off grid. And, I'm privileged to do that. But I think that people are saying that they have I support the law overall. I think that there's certain people that are going to have economic problems with it, but I do think the staff's alignment of cost is correct. And anybody that says it costs $300,000 to modify a house with electrical is wrong. I think that solar could scale up, and with the heat, I probably designed 20 heat pump systems for heating this year, highly efficient electrical systems. If you build a new house and put gas in, you're going to be spending more money just putting that gas line in than you would to have an electric heat system that functions. And if you put solar panels on your house, you're going to heat your house for free forever. So there's the fact that you can be in control of your costs for a 5 kilowatt system on your roof, heat your house with heat pumps, heat your hot water with heat pumps. I don't see any choice. I recommend to all my clients that they do away with any idea of gas. The county, of course, doesn't allow it now. City of Half Moon Bay still allows it, but it is not cost effective to install gas at all. Plumbing a gas system in is very expensive. Let's see. Finally, I realize there's problems with going into old houses and doing the retrofits, and that is expensive. But what we have to do is incentivize it with free permits and other incentivizations from the city in order to make this more cost effective. Some of the solar incentives are going down. Maybe the city could do something there, but electricity in the long run, especially if you produce it yourself, is going to be the way to go, especially if you have solar panels or local production, because gas is 25 cents a therm now. Next year, nobody saw gas at $5 a gallon, okay? The gas goes up like that. Electricity is way more stable in our production of it, so thank you.
Thank you.
And our next speaker is Tom. Tom, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Tom Cabot. I live over in Menlo Park. I do a lot of volunteer work as an energy consultant, trying to help people figure their way through the electrification puzzle. And I agree, it is a new way to look at things. It takes a little bit of a pivot to figure out how will we be fair to the future? Because the climate change that we're starting to see at our age is just getting worse. And it's not going to be fair to our children and their children. We, I think, have to take responsibility and shoulder some of the cost of doing this conversion to give them a more viable climate. The scientists are telling us that if we want to meet the 2-degree rise limit in the Paris Accord, we actually don't have room to install any replacement gas equipment. We actually have to pivot now to all replacements being all electric. So I really applaud the efforts in Half Moon Bay and your progress there. I want you to realize that lots of us are watching and cheering you on and eager to see your creative solutions. How do you go about doing the balance and putting the needs of the many future generations ahead of us in perspective with the inconvenience expressed by some of us who aren't yet ready to pivot? I did my own conversion on my house, and it cost a total of about $7,000, but I would have spent about $5,000 if I had just replaced with the gas devices. And so it had an incremental cost of only about $2,000 more. I used a window heat pump and then a mini split heat pump that was a do-it-yourself model. I bought a heat pump water heater from the store and installed it myself. I'm one of those 90% of people who did something without a permit. Oh no. Anyway, it works, and I put in a stove, and everything's great. Thanks. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. That concludes public comments. Oh, we have one more, actually. Diane, you have 2 minutes.
Good evening. Thank you. Mayor Brownstone, council members, thank you for taking the time to have this study session on the building electrification ordinance. My name is Diane Bailey. I run a small climate nonprofit called Menlo Spark and serve the broader region on efforts to facilitate a fast transition off of fossil fuels for our climate. As you well know, we are facing a climate emergency with devastating impacts to Half Moon Bay as well as the broader region. And we're already feeling some of those impacts now. For example, today is a Spare the Air Day due to the smoke from wildfires. And we know that wildfires are now 5-fold larger. They've increased due to climate change. And that's just to name a few of the impacts. So the current electrification ordinance is really a thoughtful and well-crafted package that meets this challenging moment. Thinking back to Veronica's slide about the emission contribution and just about 50% coming from natural gas use in buildings, I really hope you'll support this moving forward. And I want to commend staff on doing a great job on this. I don't want to repeat the excellent comments that you heard from Adrian Etherton, Robert Whitehair, and Tom Cabot. I support their views. I do want to point out that there are a lot of options to provide flexibility with all the many concerns that you've heard this evening. I think it's important to take those into consideration and craft some level of flexibility. But At the same time, continuing methane gas use without a plan to rapidly phase out fossil fuel use really isn't an option. We need to find a way to move forward and help everyone electrify, even if that means a phased approach, but let's get started. We can offer exemptions, think about exemptions for hardship or significant cost or excessive potential delays, but let's find a way to get started to phase out methane gas. We know what we need to do. Thank you so much for your consideration. Let's work together towards a climate safe future.
Thanks. Next, we have Steve Schmidt.
Yes, hi, this is Steve Schmidt. I live in Los Altos Hills. I would like to support this ordinance. We're working on our climate action plan here in Los Altos Hills. There was a question earlier about what other towns or cities in the area are working on something similar. We are also proposing in our climate action plan that we would get off gas entirely by 2045. We believe that's essential to meet the state's goals. In our latest greenhouse gas inventory, we did include leakage rates from natural gas. And as a result, our natural gas, residential natural gas segment was much larger than transportation, very similar to what your findings were. But we did include the leakage rates. I have electrified my own house and had very similar experiences to what Tom mentioned just a minute ago. The incremental cost, if I had just replaced all the natural gas devices with new natural gas devices, instead I got electric devices, the incremental cost was really only about $3,000. So I disagree with some of the previous speakers about, yes, the cost of electricity is more per BTU than natural gas, but the current electric devices are far more efficient than any natural gas devices, and that needs to be taken into account. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Next is Bryce Cook.
Good evening, council members. Mayor Brownstone, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it very much. I'm an over the hill guy, as they say. I do work in the Half Moon Bay area. You know, this is quite a mixed bag, and it's a bit of a quandary, especially for realtors, because I represent a bunch of them. I think the main concern is, how is our relationship with PG&E? I think it's wonderful that we're converting. I think if we have sufficient grid for these increases, that's fantastic. I'd love for that to be the emphasis, that we're gonna bring these new devices to the grid and they're gonna be supported. It seems now that there is a lack of support already. So to me, that was the biggest red flag. And I don't know if you guys are looking further into that. I do think it's wonderful, and I love all the further comments, the green comments, and some pricing of people that have done conversions. That's very encouraging, because I actually am not aware of that. So, you know, I think finally, as we go further away from Highway 1 and you go up into the hills and you go into these independent properties, it's a very dangerous proposition to not allow people the freedom of having some form of energy. They may be in the woods, they may need backup power, and to make that illegal, I think, is something that we need to consider. So let's think about the people that are lesser fortunate, that aren't directly on the main grid and or have a lot of power outages. How do we accommodate for them and keep them safe? And then, you know, I just want to recommend that everybody seriously keep pushing this forward and that we take these things into consideration. And thank you guys for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bryce.
That concludes public comments, ma'am.
Okay, I am now officially ending public comment portion of this study session. Thank you all. We've had over 20 comments, and really appreciate all those comments from the public. And I think we heard from quite a broad range of perspectives. And I would now like to open this up for council deliberations. Oh, I didn't see who went first. Was it Councilmember Rohrback or Ruddick? look down for a second. Councilmember Rohrabacher says it was me. It was me. All right, Councilmember Rohrabacher, give it your best shot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be brief. At the last council meeting, we had the sad opportunity to have to cancel the pumpkin festival. Nobody wanted to do it, but we had to for public safety. And we understood that there were going to be consequences, both for the nonprofits and for community goodwill. But we took our responsibilities for public safety seriously, and that's why we did what we had to do. Well, this ordinance is the same idea. If we really care about safety, public welfare, then we need to do what the ordinance requires. The public in this case is the planet. There's no question that climate change is going to affect the planet in a very deleterious way. It's already done it. We need to do whatever we can to try to reduce the effects of climate change any way we can. And that's why this electrification ordinance is a step in the right direction. It's not the only thing that we can do, but it's a very important thing. And yes, it's going to cause inconvenience. It's going to cause difficulty, just like canceling the pumpkin festival did. It's not going to be cheap, but I don't think we really have a choice if we care about the welfare of the planet. And that's why I'm in full support of this ordinance. The details about what exemptions and exceptions we should have, I'll be glad to talk about. But in general terms, I think we really have to understand why we're doing this. We're doing this for the health and welfare of the planet, and that's really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rohrabacher. Councilmember Ruddock, please.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment just yet, but I wanted to know if staff had a slide just summarizing the key points of the city council's draft ordinance, so that we can have a discussion around the various points in the ordinance. You can just summarize for us what is in that ordinance without having to go back to the staff report and all that stuff. You have a slide or two that just summarizes.
Sure. So the draft ordinance that
why don't we
this one? Or the one with the considerations at the end?
I think if we have quick access to both, that would be good while we, discuss.
Sure.
So is there, I mean, we can, I think you had another presentation. I mean, we've done other presentations to the community where we get into more detail about all the nuts and bolts of the ordinance, which we could certainly pull out if there's a detail more than this. We also indicated at the end is a summary of sort of all of the requested or potential policy and exemption conversation consolidated by residential and commercial. And I guess that was sort of our thought would be the place perhaps to start with.
Yeah, just take a couple of minutes and review the draft ordinance provisions. So there's no confusion about what you're starting from.
Okay. So
I'm going to remind council members that we have 20 minutes left. So let's use our time wisely before we begin our full city council meeting.
Veronica, I think if you review the 4 points on that slide, that is the summary that Councilmember Ruddock is looking for. And then after you do that, you can flip to those last 2 slides you had.
Okay. So the slide that I just had up, sorry, Bob, this one?
Yeah, I think she just wanted you to summarize the key points of the current ordinance, which I believe are those 4 points. That's
Sure.
without
Yes.
needing to go into extra detail. Those are the 4 key points as the ordinance sits now. And then after you do that, you can toggle to those 2 other slides that you teased earlier. That starts to show options that the council has before them.
Yeah, sure. So the draft ordinance that we published on Earth Day is these 4 points here. So all electric, it would require all electric new construction, both residential and commercial, with no exemptions. It would require that any time an appliance is replaced, it would be replaced with an electric appliance. So no new gas appliances would be installed. All of that leading to the gas lines being capped or decommissioned by January 1st, 2045. Then we have some expanded electric vehicle and solar requirements. So making sure there's more buildings have electric vehicle charging, have more ready vehicle charging, and then more types of buildings have added solar and require a backup battery that would better reflect the energy use that's expected. And that would be the electric vehicle, and the solar requirements are for new construction only, not for existing buildings.
So if I could, the replacement at the top, the replacement issue was sort of twofold. One, if it was a voluntary replacement, someone was doing a remodel and they were choosing to move forward with that, we would require all electric under the current ordinance. If a unit burned out, the burnout aspect of this, if the unit burned out, reached its life's end, then that would be replaced with electric. So there are 2 conditions under which those would be replaced, and that would cover both residential and commercial scenarios as it's currently drafted. So.
And
So
just a reminder.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So remodels, would that be like large remodels, say like Mr. Pond referred to, 50% remodels would trigger all replacement?
So let's so the remodel involving the appliance we're talking about. If you want to go in and mess with and redo your master bathroom, for example, and it does not have a gas fireplace or any gas appliance related to it directly, that would not kick in the requirements for electrification. It would only be if you're dealing with your kitchen where you have perhaps gas appliances in there, a gas stove, for example. If you're messing in your washroom, your laundry room, and you would have to deal with that. If you have a replacement of your water heater or your furnace, those would apply in those situations, but this would not be attached to any kind of remodel, addition, expansion, or whatever with that. Now, you start to get into some of the semantics of this and the difficulty, which is if you're expanding your house, are you required then to do the furnace? Or can you use the existing furnace? Is it an adequate size to be able to handle the additional square footage? That's a nuance to this that would be based on whether that furnace could handle the additional loading or not, and if they were proposing to replace it. The idea always behind this is that really this was a run at the burnout side, which was to basically let people get the full time of their current appliances for the most part, while recognizing that when it was time to replace them, because they wore out, because they went out of commission, that they would replace them with electric. That was the premise of this as a burnout ordinance.
Thank you. Councilmember Jimenez.
Well, I am not a homeowner. I don't own a home in Half Moon Bay, but I do know a few people that own homes. So it's something to think about. You know, the ordinance to do all electrical for new construction I'm okay with that. You know, I am trying to do as much as I can to support, to go green. I mean, you see my screen, green, go green. But I have to also consider other things. I have to consider this, it's not cheap, to do this remodeling, replacing is to a cost. I don't own a home, but I own a vehicle, an old vehicle. So I got to think about it. If my vehicle's engine goes out, I don't think I can afford to buy an electric vehicle. More likely I will replace, my engine or my transmission before I consider, purchasing an electric vehicle. So with that, I'm, have decided, to leave it up to the house owners to replace, either want to replace, their appliances. We talked about replacing electric stoves replacing gas stoves by, with electric stoves. As I understand it from an electrician, it's not worth it. It is very expensive. It is doesn't compare. And not everybody is able to afford that. So, thinking about, my vehicle, thinking about the expenses, the cost to our community members, thinking about this ordinance, about how much change can actually have HMBC do, in protecting our planet. I care about the planet. I want to make sure that my great grandkids is still be able to enjoy what I'm enjoying right now. But also have to think about, I have to be able to survive right now in my, my present situation, so I can provide for my family. So the cost of my investment is not feasible for me. So, considering that, I'm okay, like I said, for new construction, to go all electrical. But when it comes to replacing at a time of burn, when it has to be replaced, I think we have to give that up to the owners to do that. They have to be able to have the funds to be able to do it. I think, it was brought up before, when you really want to go green, teach by example, show us how to do it. Let me see you do it. I use the examples of my vehicle because, that's what I have to show. We're talking about batteries, lithium batteries. How long do they last for? What's going to happen after that? My great grandkids are going to be affected by that. So going all electrical, not everybody's going to be able to afford it. The cost of going all electrical in some homes, some buildings, some apartment buildings, is going to bring up the cost of the rent. As it is right now, we have a lot of residents in Half Moon Bay. They're having a difficult time affording rent in Half Moon Bay. So you force homeowners or apartment building owners to do this, we're going to be driving our community out. As much as I want to go green, I'm also thinking about the present. I have to be able to survive, and it's not feasible for me. just like it's on Facebook for a lot of, for a lot of people in our community. So that's where I stand.
Thank you, Councilmember Jimenez. We have about 10 minutes left. Councilmember Penrose, was there anything you wanted to comment at this point?
Sure. I understand where Councilmember Jimenez is coming from. But I think that somehow we can work it out so that the retrofitting is done in a phased-in manner. I have the sense that the incentives, the tax rebates, the incentives, different kinds of financial incentives are going to become larger over the next couple of years. I think that we could consider some way of having the city support people of very low income in retrofitting. So I think if we're creative, we can make it happen in a way that is not going to unnecessarily burden those of lower income. I'm not sure exactly how, but I think we can do it. I think we need to be creative and do it.
Thank you, Councilmember Penrose. Okay, since we only have a few minutes, I'd like to have a chance to chime in and then circle back to Councilmember. Yeah, I see your hands up, Councilmember Rudd. I'd like to make a few comments first. What I've heard tonight is quite a range of what people say how much these things are going to cost. Based on our own survey, we had an average cost of home to replace equipment at around $23,000. And I've heard a lot of other numbers. Even if I went for half of that $23,000, it was like $12,000 or $13,000. That could be pretty expensive, and for a lot of folks. I am much more in agreement with Councilmember Jimenez's perspective on this. And I'm much more in favor of putting this off. I do want to address Councilmember Rohrback real quickly. This is not the same, to me anyway, as canceling the Pumpkin Festival. The Pumpkin Festival, in your own words, was going to potentially create a super spreader event based on density. It was a public safety issue for Half Moon Bay, not for the planet. So I appreciate your sentiment and the overall concerns about climate change globally, but we have to have local solutions here. And when we're talking about these kind of expenses and how expensive right now electricity is, and I don't have any great faith in PG&E in terms of raising rates. I heard one of the speakers say, hey, look at the price of gasoline in a pump. Gasoline in a pump is not the same as natural gas. So, those false kind of comparisons, I don't think is really helpful in the conversation. We live in a country where the majority of people in this country barely have enough money in savings to pay for 2 or 3 months of rent and mortgage payments. These are large expenses we're talking about. I think the rebates as they exist right now, it's true, they might increase later, but now they're totally inadequate. So, I think for residential uses, I would want to certainly delay the application of these requirements for 5 years minimum, if not 10. And let's wait to see how these incentives, I'd love to incentivize people as much as possible, but I want to wait and see what those incentives looks like. I don't think, we should be going first here. I think it's worthwhile to wait to see how do these incentives play out when major, population centers start coming aboard and we see major decreases in the price of these products and services. So that's where I'm currently standing right now. And For new construction, no problem having electrification. But for existing, I completely agree with Councilmember Jimenez's perspective. Councilmember Ruddock?
Yeah, of course, support the ordinance relative to new commercial and residential construction. I'd be willing to support a delay for commercial compliance. I think we need to take a look. I'm good with a 5-year extension. In the meantime, we need to look at the needs of both small businesses, and larger businesses and distinguish them, because a small business, 5 years, 10 years, it's going to be more difficult for them to make the transition. So 5 years for commercial, take a look at the class of business in the meantime. I would be willing to delay residential retrofit, except for water heating and HVAC. And the reason I say that is because you get a big bang for the buck on HVAC, and there's lots of rebates around that. As for cooking and other appliances, I would give them a buy. I would give them a buy for 10 years or whatever. I just don't see them contributing a whole lot. So I'd be willing to delay for them, but require burnout for water heaters and HVAC. I do support capping all pipes by 2045. I would like us to have, I don't know how you want to define it, low income or economic hardship. Then I would like to prioritize whatever assistance we might be able to muster, whether it's, any city assistance or, aggregating outside rebates, state and federal assistance. I think there's going to be more and more of that as we go along. But I think we need to distinguish between your standard, market rate home and homes occupied by low-income residents. So I think they need to be treated differently, and we need to prioritize resources for that income class. And we might want to look, at the issue of multifamily housing in terms of a delay similar to commercial, just because it is a bigger expense. They require probably more technical assistance. That's kind of where I'm coming down. So all new construction, go for it. Give a buy to anything but HVAC and water heating or residential, but then we need to give exemptions and special assistance and prioritization for economic hardship and low income folks. I think we've heard from many people, even those who are uncomfortable with giving up gas stoves. I think the public here, by and large, knows that we're going down this path and there's no retreat, because climate change is a crisis and it's only going to get worse, and it's not going to turn around anytime soon. We've already put so much greenhouse gas into the atmosphere that we're looking at 1,000 years of climate change before anything starts turning around. So we have to look out for future generations, not just for you at your gas stove, but your children, your grandchildren, and the kind of world they're going to live in. So I'm worried about, cooking, but I'm worried about me being cooked and my family being cooked, not so much my food. I happen to live in an all-electric home. I moved into an all-electric home. I'm not off the grid. I don't have solar yet. I don't have a heat pump water heater yet, but I am getting ready to do the water heater thing. I've used them I bought one of the original induction stoves. I've had it for 16 years. It works great. It simulates gas. not quite as refined. I know the next generation of induction stoves is much improved. So you can go there and you can manage the costs. I also think that we need a robust community education program, much like we did with our waste management contract, to talk to people about composting and organics and all that kind of a thing. You know, I want to highlight on our website people who have gone electric, their success stories with their heat pump water heater, their induction stove. I want to get out there to the neighborhoods, Piata Cove, you know, Main Street Village, talk about the possibilities. But we're going to need lots of, you know, technical information and cost information available to do that educating. And there's lots of resources in the community. There's Menlo Spark, there's Thrive, a lot of PCE. We need to marshal all that information and bring people along, because I believe as much as climate change is a horrendous threat, I think we have to meet people where they are. And they're not exactly where we would like them to be quite yet, but we can't wait either. So that's why I'm feeling, you know, sort of like this is a sort of hybrid approach I can support that gets us, you know, further down the road and then, you know, minimizes the need for things that don't produce that much bang for a buck, at least not as much as water heating and HVAC. So I'm not going to go all the way. I'm not going to do nothing, but I'd like us to balance it and recognize that we can phase this and move forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Reddick. Now I need to do a process check here. So we're at 7:02. People are waiting for the city council meeting to resume. We're going to need a break in between, I think. I don't see how we necessarily have enough time here to give enough instruction to staff. I think we might need to continue this conversation. I feel like we might need some more detail here about what some of the options are. So that's where I am. I think we're gonna need to continue this. We can either add some time to another council meeting or agendize it. But I think there's a lot of information here. I think staff has done a fantastic job. I think council needs to have some time to really look at all the options as well. And so that's where I am right now. There's 2 more hands raised. Can we be brief? And then I'm going to suggest that we have to pick this up at a future meeting. Councilmember Robert.
I will be brief. I don't support an exemption for residential cooking, partly because the indoor air pollution that's caused by natural gas combustion really is a health problem. And if we're concerned about health and asthma in children, I think one straightforward way of getting that improved is to eliminate natural gas flames in houses. And so if along with Debbie Ruddick, we could make requirements that HVAC and water heaters should not be exempt, I would include stoves and for the reasons that I just mentioned.
Councilmember Penrose.
I'd like us to have another study session on this. I think there are too many details for us to stop the discussion right now. I'd like to talk about at least 10 different points that have been made on this, at least. And there are details that I don't have, information I don't have, information that I don't understand. So I would like another study session.
Thank you.
I could support continuing this meeting, but I'd like us to give like some direction to staff, like look at phasing options that make sense for one. So when it comes back, take into consideration what you've heard summarize that and then look at phasing options. I'm not, Harvey, I'm not saying exempt cooking, I'm saying phase it, right? Again, for the reason I said, I think you have to spend some time bringing people along. And I think they will go for the alternatives that produce real efficiencies, saving real dollars, and that come with, financial support. So I'm not saying eliminate it. I think you phase it. Certainly, if we can reduce more greenhouse gas emissions with changing out HVAC and water heaters, that would be a priority.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I have a suggestion, two suggestions actually. So suggestion number one, I'm hearing consensus for continuing this for another study session. I would recommend October 5th at 5 o'clock. October 5th is the next council meeting, and it would be the same start time. So it would be a special meeting like this one, giving us another 2 hours. So that would be my first recommendation. And then my second recommendation to Councilmember Ruddick's point, and how we as staff bring back information that's helpful for you all to find consensus and make decisions. What I've seen in the past or used in the past is we will come back with a spreadsheet, possibly with each of your name on the columns and the various options on the rows. And then you can each kind of say, one person delay 5 years, another one's at 10 years. One person wants exemptions for water heater. And then we can start to find where the majority of the council seems to be together. So we'll work on that as staff and do our best to take the slide you're seeing right now, which is a very good summary of the various options that are in front of you in terms of delay and exemptions is what it comes down to, and then residential and commercial. And we'll try to create a tool that's helpful so that as Councilmember Penrose says, she has lots of questions right now. She wants to think about it. And I think that will be helpful when we come back for that study session. So those are my two suggestions. If you guys want another date, let us know, and we'll do our part as staff to make it as easy as possible with our next staff report and spreadsheet for you to use.
Thank you, Bob. I agree with those suggestions. The things I would add to that spreadsheet, because yes, I think I appreciate you need to push us as council members to do our homework. We need more answers, so we just need a format. So in terms of a spreadsheet, not just saying, you're for something or not, but inclusive also, what do you need more information on to make a decision? Because some of us may not be able to fill in, where are you at? 5-year exemption, 10-year, without some more information as well. So I think if we have another good study session and we do our due diligence to ask staff to provide the extra information, about costs, et cetera. Harvey brought up health concern. What does that really look like for indoor gas stoves? Yeah, let's get, because there could be, is there one study out there? Is there two? Everyone could bring in studies to support their perspective. And obviously we had quite a wide range of supposed studies, and costs, et cetera. So I think if we can get a little more consensus on that, that would be great. So is everyone good with that to proceed? October 5th, let's schedule another 2-hour session. Staff will put together a poll sheet for us to ask our questions on all these categories, which I think is great.
And Mr. Mayor, I would encourage all council members, as you said, to get questions to us ahead of time. Get the questions. If there's more information each council member needs to decide whether they like one option or another, please get those to us ahead of time, because some questions we'll do the research, but they may not have answers. On the health question, for example, we only know what we know, but it's probably inconclusive.
Yep, great. Okay, our break right now, folks. What do you need? I'm sorry, I can't.
10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay. We'll resume at 7:20 and someone can go back to the public and make that announcement. We're sorry we went over time. And we'll reconvene at 7:20. Thanks, everyone. Great staff work. Thank you so much.